snow fell in unbroken silence upon Château Montciel, wrapping the world in a shroud of white. The storm had raged for 3 days, isolating its guests from the nearest village below. Inside, laughter had once danced through the halls, until a scream shattered the stillness. Chapter 1. Whispers Beneath the Snow. The storm had come early that winter, a swirling tempest that clawed at the peaks of the Swiss Alps and wrapped the world in a suffocating white hush. From the valley below, Château Montciel was barely visible, a lone silhouette on the mountainside, its lights flickering faintly through the blizzard, like the dying eyes of a watchful ghost. Inside the chateau, firelight glowed upon dark wood and polished brass. The scent of pine resin mingled with the faint, clean bite of snow, carried in through the ill-fitting windows. Heavy velvet curtains trembled as the wind hurled itself against the panes. The guests had gathered in the great drawing-room, each seeking the warmth of the fire, but keeping the distance of civility. Hercule Poirot, seated by the hearth in a high-backed armchair, gazed thoughtfully at the flames. His immaculate moustaches caught the light, and his grey-green eyes observed everything. The nervous twitch of a hand, the half-finished glass of cognac, the way glances darted across the room like quick, guilty birds. Monsieur Émile Vasseur, the host of the evening, stood near the grand piano, his laughter too loud, too forced. He was a man of wealth and calculation, known in Geneva circles for his daring investments and subtle cruelties. His dark hair was slicked back, his waistcoat of deep burgundy. Yet beneath the confidence there was something brittle, like glass about to crack. "My friends," Vasseur said, raising his glass, "to fortune, to friendship, and to the safety of our humble prison of snow." The others murmured their assent, some smiling, some not. Madame Colette Vasseur, his wife, sat opposite him, motionless in her armchair. Her gown was the colour of frost, her eyes colder still. She did not raise her glass. She merely said softly, "To safety, yes, though not all prisons have walls." Her words lingered longer than her husband's laughter. Henri Marchand, Vasseur's business partner, cleared his throat uneasily. He was a younger man, sharp-featured, with ink stains on his fingers that betrayed his nervous habit of writing and rewriting letters he never sent. "Well," he said, "at least we shall not be bored. The road to Montreux is quite gone, and the telegraph wires are down. We are, it seems, cut off from civilization." "Then we must make our own," said Lucien Duret, the painter. He was leaning by the window, cigarette in hand, his dark hair falling over one eye. His tone was languid, but there was something in his gaze that moved, an artist's sensitivity sharpened by resentment. "Monsieur Vasseur, your chateau is a masterpiece of isolation, perfect for inspiration or despair." Vasseur's mouth tightened, but he smiled. "You see, Poirot, even in exile, art survives." Poirot inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Art, monsieur, survives everything except perhaps truth. That, too, is an art of its own." Miss Evelyn Grey, the English governess, looked up from her embroidery at this. She was small, quiet and pale, her hair tucked neatly beneath a dark headband. She had been employed to tutor the daughter of a guest who never arrived. And yet here she remained, unpaid, unthanked, but somehow still present. "Truth," she said in her light voice, "is not always what we think it to be, Monsieur Poirot." The detective's eyes gleamed. "Ah, mademoiselle, indeed. It is often what we hope it is not." The conversation faltered. Outside, the wind howled again, shaking the shutters violently. The butler, René, entered with a tray of fresh logs. His footsteps were soft, but the quiet of the room made them sound like echoes from another time. He set the wood by the hearth, bowed slightly, and left without a word. There was something unnerving about the silence that followed him, like a moment between breaths when the heart hesitates. Vasseur spoke first, too cheerfully. "René is a ghost himself, I sometimes think. My father's butler before mine, and perhaps my son's after. He knows every creak of this place." "If the chateau could speak," said Lucien, "perhaps it would tell him what it remembers." Colette gave a small, Joubel mirthless laugh. "It remembers too much already." Poirot's gaze drifted toward the high arched windows. Snow pressed against the glass, whispering as it fell. "The snow, madame," he said softly, "has ears. It listens to everything, though it says nothing until morning." That earned him a curious look from Henri Marchand. "Do you mean it conceals secrets?" "I mean," said Poirot, folding his hands, "that it keeps them until the sun compels it to confess." A log cracked in the fire with a sound like a gunshot. Evelyn flinched. Outside, the wind dropped for a heartbeat, and in that sudden hush came another sound, the low groan of the timbers, the whisper of something moving beyond the walls. "What was that?" Colette murmured. "Only the storm," said Vasseur. But his eyes flicked toward the ceiling. Poirot rose, adjusting his cufflinks. "Perhaps, monsieur, it would be prudent to ensure the doors are bolted. Storms are unreliable companions." Vasseur nodded to René, who appeared soundlessly once more, and vanished down the corridor to check the locks. When he was gone, Lucien moved closer to the fire. "You are fortunate, Poirot," he said quietly, "to have no ghosts." "Ah, but I have many," Poirot replied. "Only I have learned to make them sit politely." Lucien smiled faintly. "Mine prefer to wander." Henri laughed nervously. "Perhaps we should have a séance. Colette, you believe in such things, do you not?" Colette's eyes, shadowed in the firelight, did not move. "No, I believe in memory. It is crueler than ghosts." For a while, no one spoke. The storm thickened outside. Flakes tapped softly against the glass like cold fingers seeking entry. Poirot watched the way the light flickered on faces, the little betrayals of expression, the fatigue, the tension beneath the polite surfaces. He had been invited here as a curiosity, a trophy guest, the great detective, as Vasseur had put it. Yet already he felt the unease of a man who has stepped into a play without knowing the script. At length, Vasseur turned to him. "Tell me, Poirot," he said with an almost mocking tone, "you have seen so much of crime. Do you ever tire of suspicion?" Poirot smiled gently. "Never, monsieur. Suspicion is like the snow. It may fall lightly, but it always leaves a trace." That silenced Vasseur, though not his thoughts. He turned away, poured himself another drink, and stared into the flames. Madame Colette rose. "If you gentlemen will excuse me, the storm gives me headaches." She crossed the room, her perfume trailing faintly behind her, a scent of jasmine and something sharper. At the doorway she paused, looking back at her husband. "Do not drink too much tonight, Emile. The walls here remember everything." When she was gone, Henri exhaled. "I sometimes wonder how she endures him." Lucien's hand tightened on his cigarette. "She endures because she must." Vasseur heard and smiled without humour. "My dear Lucien, you paint my wife's portrait, not her heart. Leave that canvas blank." Poirot watched the exchange with mild interest. "You're all trapped here together, mes amis," he said softly. "Perhaps the snow will teach you patience, or perhaps it will teach you truth." "Truth," murmured Evelyn, "has a way of finding us whether we seek it or not. At that moment, the door opened and René returned. His face was pale. "All doors are secured, monsieur, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Vasseur asked sharply. René's eyes flicked to the window. "There are footprints in the courtyard, fresh. They come from the woods and stop at the steps." Vasseur frowned. "Impossible. No one could climb the path in this weather." "I saw them myself, monsieur," René said quietly. "They were light but deep. A small foot, perhaps a woman's." The room fell into silence. The only sound was the fire, crackling like a whisper too close to hear. Poirot stood, his head tilting slightly. "Ah," he said softly, "the snow has begun to speak." Vasseur forced a laugh. "Perhaps only one of us wandered out. Lucien, you went to smoke, did you not?" Lucien shook his head. "Not tonight. I had enough of the cold last winter." Henri spread his hands nervously. "It must be the wind's trick. Shadows, nothing more." But Poirot walked to the window and peered out. Beyond the Bois Chute, glass, in the pale wash of moonlight, the footprints were visible, faint, fragile impressions leading from the tree line to the very steps of the terrace. They ended there, abruptly, as if their maker had vanished into the air. Poirot's breath misted the glass. "No return prints," he murmured. "Whoever came did not leave." Behind him, Evelyn's voice trembled. "But no one else is here." Poirot turned slowly. "So it seems." He stepped back, his reflection merging with the storm beyond the window. "Monsieur Vasseur," he said, "you will forgive me, but I suggest we keep to our rooms tonight. Tomorrow, when the snow clears, we may see the truth more clearly." Vasseur nodded uneasily. "Yes, yes, a trick of the light, nothing more." But as the guests retired, each to their chamber, the air of the chateau seemed to shift. The laughter was gone, replaced by the creak of the stairs, the sigh of old wood, the whisper of snow against stone. Poirot lingered in the corridor listening. Beneath the howling of the wind, he thought he heard something else. A faint rhythmic sound, like footsteps pacing slowly above. He looked up toward the darkened landing, his face grave. "Whispers beneath the snow," he said softly to himself, "and already I smell tragedy." Outside, the storm raged on. The footprints on the terrace deepened as fresh snow fell, covering them one by one, until by dawn there would be no trace left at all. Only the whisper of what had begun. Chapter 2. The Scream at Midnight. The chateau slept uneasily beneath its white shroud. The wind had dulled to a moan, and the great clock in the hall ticked through the hours like a slow, patient heartbeat. Hercule Poirot, in his room overlooking the frozen lake, lay awake in thought. The day's oddities, the footprints, the strained glances, the brittle laughter, had stirred that small, persistent voice in his mind that whispered of wrongness. It was nearing midnight when it came. The scream. It cut through the silence with terrible clarity, a sound of pure human terror, echoing through the corridors and into every locked door. Poirot was on his feet at once, robe drawn tight around his shoulders, his little feet silent on the Persian runner as he stepped into the hallway. From the far end, a door burst open. Henri Marchand stumbled out, pale and trembling. "Good God, what was that?" Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Listen." From below came hurried footsteps, shouts, the crash of something heavy. Poirot and Marchand hurried down the staircase together, joined by Lucien Duret and Miss Evelyn Gray, who clutched her shawl tightly around her. At the base of the grand staircase, the butler René stood frozen, his candle trembling in his hand. The pool of light revealed the figure sprawled across the marble steps. Émile Vasseur. His head lay at an unnatural angle, eyes half open, one arm reaching toward the banister as though still seeking help. A dark ribbon of blood wound slowly across the floor. Madame Colette appeared moments later, her face pale but composed, her gown of silver silk dragging across the tiles. She looked once at the body and said quietly, "It is done, then." Poirot knelt beside the corpse, his movements precise and gentle. "The wound," he murmured, "is sharp, clean, a blade, not a fall. There is no weapon visible, and no sign of struggle. It was quick." Henri swallowed hard. "But how? We're in our rooms," Poirot finished. "Yes, of course, as in all good mysteries, monsieur." He looked up. "René, how did you come here?" "I heard the scream, monsieur. It came from above, near the landing. I found him like this only moments ago." Poirot studied his face, steady, grief-controlled. "And no one else?" "No, monsieur. No one passed me." Poirot rose, his eyes narrowing as he examined the steps. There was a faint smudge of red on the upper banister, and a small patch of snow melted near the bottom step. He crouched, touched it with a fingertip. "Snow," he said softly. "And yet the doors are locked, the windows latched." Lucienne exhaled sharply. "Then the murderer is among us." No one answered him. Madame Colette moved to the body and looked down without tears. "He was not a good man," she said at last, "but he did not deserve this." Poirot turned to her. "You do not seem surprised, madame." Her eyes flicked up, cold as the snow outside. "When a man collects enemies as other men collect art, his death is only a matter of time." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "And yet the timing is curious. In a house locked by snow, surrounded by silence, how convenient that death arrives precisely when escape is impossible." He straightened. "Mes amis, I must ask that no one leave this room. The gendarmes cannot come until morning, and the telephone—" "Dead," said Marchand. "It failed this afternoon." "Alors," Poirot said, "we are quite alone." He surveyed them one by one. Madame Colette, motionless and elegant. Henri Marchand, sweating, his fingers trembling against his waistcoat. Lucien Duret, his gaze fixed on the fire, his jaw clenched tight. Miss Grey, pale and stricken, pressing her handkerchief to her lips. René, silent as stone. Poirot spoke softly, almost to himself. "There are 5 faces, and one truth hidden among them." He gestured toward the butler. "René, fetch blankets. Cover Monsieur Vasseur, if you please. We must treat even death with dignity." René obeyed. As he covered the body, the guests retreated a step, as though the stillness itself might infect them. Poirot turned to the hearth, warming his hands as he spoke. "It is strange, is it not? A house sealed by nature, yet murder finds its way in. How simple the human heart is! It needs no open door." No one replied. The only sound was the slow hiss of the fire. After a moment, Poirot said, "Madame, when did you last see your husband alive?" "Just after dinner," Colette replied. "He went to his study. He said he had business papers to review. I went to my room." Poirot nodded. "And you, Monsieur Marchand?" Marchand shifted uneasily. I went to bed early. I'd been drinking more than I should." Lucien's lip curled faintly. "You drink enough to drown a confession, Henri." Marchand glared at him. "And you, artist, always awake, always watching. Were you painting at midnight, perhaps?" Lucien's voice was calm. "No, I was looking out the window. I saw nothing but snow." Poirot's gaze moved to Miss Grey. "Mademoiselle, did you hear anything before the scream?" She hesitated, then nodded. Footsteps, soft, just outside my door. I thought perhaps someone was restless. Which direction did they go? Toward the staircase. Poirot considered this. So, we have the footsteps again. They walked last night in the courtyard, and tonight they walk the corridors. Madame Colette spoke, her tone sharp. You mean to say a ghost is our murderer, Monsieur Poirot? He smiled faintly. No, madame. Merely that our murderer is no ghost, but someone who wishes to move as one. René returned then, his face drawn. Monsieur, the study door is open. There are papers scattered on the floor, as though someone searched the desk. Ah, Poirot murmured. Then perhaps our victim had more to lose than life. He motioned for René to lead the way. The guests followed reluctantly, the air thick with fear. The study was a handsome room, panelled in oak, smelling faintly of cigars and ink. On the desk lay a sheaf of torn papers, one corner marked with blood. The fire had died to embers. Poirot moved to the desk and found a letter opener, silver, sharp, clean. He lifted it, examined it in the light. No trace of blood. Not the weapon, he said softly, but near it. On the floor, a chair had toppled. Beside it, a small square of folded paper half hidden beneath the rug. Poirot picked it up. In fine handwriting it read, The betrayal comes not from the hand but the heart. Forgive me. No signature. Poirot stared at it for a long moment, then folded it carefully into his pocket. Henri said, Suicide, perhaps. He could not face his own sins. Poirot shook his head. The wound is too precise, too cold. Suicide leaves chaos. This, I think, was calculated. He turned toward the others. Monsieur Vasseur was a man of secrets. Tonight, one of those secrets has turned upon him. And until we uncover which, no one leaves this house. A long silence fell. The fire hissed. Somewhere, a shutter banged against the wall. Lucien broke the quiet first. If what you say is true, Poirot, then one of us, one in this room, is a murderer. Poirot met his eyes. Yes, monsieur. One of you carries the snow upon your shoes. Madame Colette laughed suddenly, softly, though there was no mirth in it. Then look quickly, monsieur, before the snow melts. Poirot regarded her with something between pity and curiosity. Ah, madame, it always melts. But the footprints it leaves behind, they endure longer than one imagines. The wind rose again, rattling the windows. The lights flickered. And in the flicker of shadow and flame, Poirot saw it. The smallest thing, the faintest glint on the staircase behind them. A thin thread of silver caught on the banister. A thread from a woman's glove. He said nothing yet. He only looked up the stairs, where the darkness pooled like a secret waiting to be spoken. Then softly, almost to himself, he murmured, The snow whispers still. Chapter 3. The guests of the Chateau d'Orne came slowly to Chateau Montciel. A pale, uncertain light seeping through the frost-coated windows. The storm had weakened, but the snow still lay deep, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, the chateau was a different sort of quiet, not peace, but tension stretched thin, humming beneath every sound. Hercule Poirot sat at the breakfast table, perfectly dressed as though murder had not stalked the night. His moustaches were immaculate, his eyes bright despite little sleep. Before him, a cup of steaming chocolate sat untouched. He preferred to observe before he indulged. The others gathered one by one. Madame Colette entered first, composed, though her skin was pale as the snow outside. She wore mourning black, though no one had told her to. Her movements were elegant, deliberate, as if each gesture was performed before an invisible audience. She did not sit beside her husband's empty chair. She chose the far end of the table instead. Henri Marchand followed, dishevelled, his collar undone, eyes red from either grief or guilt. He poured himself coffee with a trembling hand, spilling a few drops onto the linen. He muttered an apology no one acknowledged. Lucien Duret appeared next, cigarette in hand, hair untamed, paint still smudged faintly on his fingers. He greeted no one, only took a seat near the window and stared out at the snowdrifts, lost in thought. Miss Evelyn Grey was last, quiet as a shadow. She offered Poirot a polite nod, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. René the butler moved soundlessly among them, his usual composure dimmed by sorrow. When he passed the table, Colette reached out and touched his sleeve lightly. "Thank you, René," she said softly. He bowed and withdrew. Poirot watched it all, each motion, each silence. He finally spoke, his tone gentle yet deliberate. "Mes amis, it is the custom in times of tragedy to comfort one another, yet here I see not comfort but distance. Why is that, I wonder?" No one answered. He continued, "Monsieur Vasseur's death was not an act of fate. It was an act of intent. That intent lies in this room." Marchand looked up sharply. "You mean to accuse one of us? How dare you?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "I accuse no one. Monsieur, I merely observe. It is what I do best." Lucien gave a faint smile. "You enjoy this, don't you, Poirot? The theatre of guilt, the audience of fear." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps, but every stage requires actors who believe their parts. Tell me, Monsieur Duret, are you performing now?" Lucien's smile faded. "If I were, monsieur, I'd choose a better script." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You were close to Madame Vasseur, were you not?" Lucien's cigarette paused halfway to his lips. "Close? Was my friend. A friend you painted in secret, perhaps," Poirot said softly. "A portrait, unfinished, hidden under a dust sheet in your studio." Lucien said nothing. The silence was answer enough. Madame Colette's voice cut through the air like a blade. "If you imply impropriety, Monsieur Poirot, you insult both of us." Poirot's tone was calm. "Non, madame. I imply only that love, even unspoken, can be the strongest of motives." Henri Marchand slammed his cup down. "This is absurd. We're prisoners here, and you play games." Poirot turned to him, eyes steady. "And you, monsieur, what game do you play? You and Monsieur Vasseur were business partners. Yet I find a letter in the study demanding repayment, a rather large sum. You owed him much, did you not?" Marchand's jaw worked. "It was a misunderstanding. He was pressuring me. But I would have paid him back." "Would have," Poirot repeated softly. "A convenient tense for the guilty." Marchand glared. "You think I killed him for money?" Poirot shrugged slightly. "People have killed for less." Evelyn, who had been silent until now, spoke suddenly. "Monsieur Poirot, must we speak of these things now? He's barely cold." Poirot turned to her. "Mademoiselle, death is like the snow. It chills quickly. The truth must be found before it freezes entirely." Her fingers clenched around her teacup. "You sound so certain." "I am certain only that everyone here hides something," Poirot replied. "Even you, perhaps." Evelyn's eyes flickered downward. "I have nothing to hide." "Then why?" Poirot asked softly. "Did you pay Monsieur Vasseur 200 francs last week?" The silence that followed was absolute. Henri stared at her in disbelief. Lucien leaned forward slightly. Colette's lips curved almost imperceptibly. Evelyn's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "You went through his papers?" Poirot did not deny it. "It is my business to see what others overlook. So, why the payment?" She drew a shaky breath. "It was a personal matter. He helped me once, in London. I was repaying him." "Ah," said Poirot. "And yet the letter I found was not a receipt. It was a threat. He promised to expose you. For what, mademoiselle?" Her face drained of colour. She looked away, voice trembling. "It was long ago. I was accused of forgery. A foolish mistake. A desperate act. He found out. He promised not to tell, if I paid him." Marchand muttered, "So he was blackmailing you, too?" "Too?" Poirot repeated quietly. "Ah, now that is interesting, Monsieur Marchand. You imply there were others." Marchand swallowed hard. Everyone knew Vasseur's nature. He lent money, he traded secrets, he collected leverage, Colette finished coldly. He was a man who found pleasure in the weaknesses of others. Poirot regarded her. "And what of your weakness, madame?" Her gaze was steady, unflinching. "My weakness, monsieur, was believing marriage could be stronger than betrayal." Her tone was calm, but Poirot noticed her hand tighten around her cup, the faint tremor beneath her poise. Lucien's voice came low. "He ruined lives and called it business. Don't pretend to mourn him." Poirot turned. "You speak with passion, Monsieur Duret. Passion can kill as surely as greed." Lucien met his eyes. "If I'd killed him, I wouldn't hide it." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "but murderers rarely tell the truth. They prefer to believe their lies." The silence that followed was colder than the snow outside. Poirot rose slowly. "Mes amis, it is time for order. I will examine the study once more. You will each remain here, together. It is safest so." Colette's lips curved slightly. "You fear the killer will strike again?" Poirot looked at her. "I fear the killer already has." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Before I go, one question, madame. Did you notice anything missing from your husband's body?" Colette frowned. "Missing?" "Yes. A ring. There is a pale mark on his finger, but no band. A wedding ring, perhaps?" Her eyes flickered just once. "He lost it weeks ago." Poirot nodded, almost to himself. "Lost? No, madame. It was removed. That is not the same thing." He left them then, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Behind him silence lingered, thick with what remained unsaid. Henri leaned back, muttering, "He'll turn us all against each other." Lucien exhaled smoke. "We don't need his help for that." Evelyn looked toward the window, her reflection pale in the frost. "Do you think he'll find the truth?" Madame Colette's voice was soft, almost wistful. "Truth, mademoiselle, is like snow. It falls beautifully and buries everything." Outside, the wind rose again, scattering the first light of day over the frozen lake. Somewhere in the distance, a shutter banged open, a hollow sound in the stillness. Poirot paused in the corridor and turned, listening. The shutter was whispering again. And beneath those whispers he felt it, that delicate tremor of deceit that always comes before revelation. Tomorrow perhaps the snow would melt. But for now it covered everything, even the truth. Chapter 4. Footprints in the white silence. The wind had eased by morning, but the cold bit deeper, as though the storm had left behind a breath that refused to die. Hercule Poirot stood at the grand entrance of Château Montciel, wrapped in a heavy overcoat, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Snow stretched across the estate like a white sea, glistening beneath the pale sun. René, the butler, waited beside him, his breath misting in the air. "Monsieur Poirot, you should not be outside so long. The doctor said the body must remain undisturbed until the gendarmes arrive." Poirot gave a faint smile. "Ah, but I am not disturbing the body, my friend. I am disturbing the truth." He stepped carefully onto the snow-covered steps, where Émile Vasseur's body had been found hours before. The crimson stain had frozen into a faint shadow beneath the thin layer of new snow, but Poirot's eyes were drawn not to that mark, but to the faint impressions leading away from it. Footprints, not many but enough. They curved toward the eastern garden, toward the frozen lake. Poirot crouched and examined them closely. The prints were small, precise, as though made by someone of light build. He traced their direction with a gloved finger. "Renee," he said softly, "when the others discovered the body, where were they?" Renee hesitated. "In their rooms, monsieur. Madame screamed when she saw him. I came running from the kitchens." Poirot nodded. "And yet, someone was here before all of you. Someone who left these marks." He followed the trail slowly, each step measured, deliberate. The air was silent except for the faint crunch of snow beneath his shoes. The chateau loomed behind him, grand, cold, watchful. Ahead lay the lake, its surface a sheet of glassy ice glinting beneath the weak sun. At the water's edge, the footprints stopped. Poirot stood very still, surveying the scene. The ice was disturbed, faint scratches near the bank, as though someone had knelt there. He bent closer, brushing aside the snow with his gloved hand. A faint gleam caught his eye. A small circular object half buried in the ice. He chipped it free gently. A gold ring. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He held it up to the light, engraved with the initials E.V. Emile Vasseur. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "so this is where the ring went." Renee crossed himself softly. "Then the killer must have thrown it away." Poirot's voice was distant. No, my friend, not thrown. Lost. See the scratches. Someone struggled here. Perhaps they slipped. Perhaps the ring came off as they tried to wash something away in the water." He crouched again, studying the area around the ring. A faint, dark stain marred the edge of the ice, almost invisible beneath the frost. Poirot dipped his handkerchief, rubbed gently, and held it up. "Blood." "Renee," Poirot said quietly, "fetch me a lantern. I must see more clearly." As Renee hurried back toward the chateau, Poirot remained alone. The cold pressed close around him, dégaging the silence too perfect. He looked across the lake. In the distance, the forest loomed dark and unmoving. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Something glittered faintly near the tree line. A reflection, perhaps glass. He made his way toward it, boots crunching on the hardened snow. It was a small perfume bottle, lying half buried beside a patch of crushed snow. He picked it up delicately. The label read Chambre Noire, Paris, half empty, expensive, feminine, Madame Colette Vasseur's perfume. Poirot stood for a long moment, the bottle glinting in his hand. Then, from behind him, a soft voice broke the stillness. "You should not be out here, Monsieur Poirot. The ice can be treacherous." He turned. Evelyn Grey stood near the edge of the trees, wrapped in a wool cloak, her face pale beneath her hood. "Ah, mademoiselle," Poirot said mildly, "you walk early." "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice low. "The air in that house feels poisoned." "Indeed," said Poirot. "But you risk the cold to escape it, yes?" She nodded faintly. Her gaze flicked to the object in his hand. "You found something." Poirot studied her carefully. "A trinket, perhaps. A bottle of perfume." Her eyes widened, only slightly, but enough. Poirot saw it. "You recognize it?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "I've seen Madame Vasseur use that scent. Every evening." "Oui," Poirot agreed. "Every evening. But last night, the bottle was not in her room." Evelyn's lips parted. "Then she, or someone who wished to imitate her," Poirot finished. Evelyn looked away toward the lake. "Do you believe she could have killed him?" Poirot tilted his head. "Do you believe it, mademoiselle?" Evelyn's voice trembled. I don't know. She was cold to him. Angry, but murder?" Poirot nodded slowly. "It is always the small emotions that betray the truth. Anger can fade, but hurt, that endures." She met his gaze. "You think it was her?" Poirot's eyes softened. "I think nothing yet. I only see the footprints, the ring, the perfume. They tell a story, but not the ending." Renée returned then, breathless, holding a lantern. Poirot thanked him and examined the ground once more. Near where the footprints ended, he noticed another faint impression, barely visible but distinct. The outline of a man's shoe, heavier, deeper. A second set of prints. Poirot straightened slowly. "Ah, so our murderer was not alone." Renée frowned. "You mean there were two?" "Perhaps," Poirot said softly. "Or perhaps the killer met someone here. Someone unexpected." He turned to Evelyn. "Tell me, mademoiselle, did you see anyone leave their room last night?" She hesitated. "I thought I heard footsteps after the scream, but I was too frightened to look." Poirot regarded her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Courage, mademoiselle. Fear is useful. It sharpens the senses." He tucked the ring and the perfume bottle into his pocket and began walking back toward the chateau. Evelyn followed, her expression unreadable. Inside, the fire had burned low, and the air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves held secrets. The others were gathered in the drawing-room, Madame Colette by the fire, Lucien pacing restlessly, Henri sitting rigid in an armchair. Poirot entered quietly. All eyes turned toward him. "Well, Monsieur Detective," Lucien said sharply, "have you found anything in your little excursion?" Poirot smiled thinly. "Mais oui, monsieur. I found what was lost, and perhaps who lost it." He placed the ring on the table. The gold gleamed faintly in the firelight. Madame Colette gasped. "Émile's ring, but how—" "It was by the lake," Poirot said softly, "along with this." He held up the perfume bottle. Her face blanched. That is mine." Henri frowned. What was it doing outside? Poirot spread his hands. "That is the question. Why would Madame's perfume be found where the victim's ring was dropped?" Lucien muttered, "Perhaps he went there to meet her." "Or perhaps," Poirot said, "someone wished to make it seem so." He turned toward Colette. "Madame, where were you after you discovered your husband's body?" "I was in my room," she said quickly. "Renée and Miss Grey can confirm." Evelyn nodded reluctantly. Yes, she was there. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, so it would seem. Yet still, the snow tells us a story, one that no alibi can silence. Lucien scowled. "You and your stories. You see meaning in shadows." Poirot smiled faintly. "But shadows, monsieur, are cast only when there is light. And now I see the light beginning to rise." He turned toward the window. The snow beyond glittered under the pale morning sun, the footprints already fading as wind swept across them. Poirot murmured almost to himself, "The snow hides the truth, but it cannot keep it forever." Behind him, the others shifted uneasily, the silence growing thick again. For somewhere among them, the one who walked to the lake last night was watching, waiting, as the evidence vanished beneath the drifting white. And Hercule Poirot, eyes narrowed, already knew the snow would not cover their guilt for long. Chapter 5. The Letter in the Desk Drawer. The morning light filtered through the frost-streaked windows of Château Montciel, thin and grey like smoke. The storm had moved on, but the silence it left behind was heavier than ever. Hercule Poirot sat in Émile Vasseur's private study, a dark, richly furnished room smelling faintly of ink, tobacco, and old secrets. The fire in the grate had burned down to embers. Dust motes drifted in the air, catching the dim light as Poirot moved slowly, his every step deliberate. He did not touch much. He did not need to. Observation, not interference, was his art. On the desk lay the traces of a restless man. an open ledger, a half-written letter, a quill that had snapped near its tip. But it was the locked drawer on the right-hand side that held Poirot's attention. The brass keyhole gleamed faintly. René, who had entered quietly behind him, hesitated at the doorway. "Monsieur Poirot, I must ask again, should we not wait for the gendarmes?" Poirot turned, smiling faintly. "The gendarmes, mon ami, will arrive when the snow permits. Until then, justice does not wait, and murderers do not rest." He produced a small pick from his pocket, and, with careful precision, eased the lock open. The drawer slid out with a faint groan. Inside was an assortment of documents, neatly tied bundles of correspondence, receipts, a silver cigarette case, and one sealed envelope, marked with a name written in a bold, impatient hand. "To be opened only in the event of my death." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "Ah, how obliging of Monsieur Vasseur." René crossed himself softly. "What does it mean, monsieur?" Poirot studied the envelope for a moment, then broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. He unfolded it carefully and began to read. "If you are reading this, it means my fears were justified. The walls have ears in this house, and the snow conceals more than footsteps. I have learned that betrayal comes not from the stranger, but from the heart itself. If harm should come to me, look to those who speak softly and love fiercely. Trust no one, not even her." A.V. Poirot read the final line twice before folding the letter again. His eyes gleamed. "From the heart itself," he murmured. "That is no metaphor, René. That is confession and accusation." René frowned. He feared Madame. "Perhaps," said Poirot, "or perhaps he feared what she had discovered." He rose, scanning the room again. The desk, though tidy, bore subtle signs of disturbance. A drawer slightly ajar, a smear of ink where a paper had been hastily pulled away. Poirot leaned close to the inkpot. Still wet, curious, he followed the trail to the wastebasket. Inside lay crumpled papers, torn letters, fragments of handwriting. Poirot knelt, retrieving one torn piece and smoothing it flat against the desk. Only a few words were legible. "The girl knows, cannot keep her silent." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, so the net tightens." He turned to René. "Mademoiselle Gray, where is she now?" "In the library, monsieur. She said she wished to read." "Excellent," Poirot said softly. "Let her read. We shall see what story she tells." He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Then, with one last glance at the desk, he straightened the papers as though nothing had been touched. The library was vast and cold, lined with shelves that reached the high ceiling. Evelyn Gray sat near the window, a book open on her lap, though her eyes were not moving over the words. She looked up as Poirot entered. "You've been busy, Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly. "The others say you've found something." Poirot inclined his head. "I have found someone's words, mademoiselle, though the writer can no longer defend them." Her expression tightened. "A letter." "Indeed," Poirot said, "your late employer was a man who liked control. Even in death, he seeks to guide us." He drew the folded letter from his pocket and set it on the table beside her. "Would you read, please?" Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the page. Her eyes moved across the lines, once, twice, and then she looked up sharply. "He thought she would kill him." Poirot's voice was calm. "So it would seem. Yet such a note could also be the weapon of a manipulator, a final cruelty from a man who lived by blackmail." Evelyn frowned. "Then you think it was written to mislead?" "Perhaps, or perhaps to reveal truth in disguise, betrayal from the heart, What does that mean to you, mademoiselle? She hesitated. It sounds like someone he loved. Oui, said Poirot softly. And who, then, did he love? His wife, or someone else? Evelyn lowered her gaze. I wouldn't know. But you would, mademoiselle, Poirot murmured, for I believe you knew much about Monsieur Vasseur, perhaps more than any of the others. Her breath caught. You're suggesting I suggest nothing, I observe. You were his secretary, were you not? You handled his correspondence, his ledgers, even his private notes. Yes, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But that doesn't mean it means, Poirot interrupted gently, that you had access to every secret he kept, including those that might destroy others. Evelyn rose abruptly, the book falling from her lap. You don't know what it was like working for him. He enjoyed fear. He would test people, make them confess things they hadn't even done. Poirot regarded her quietly. So he tormented you? She turned away, her voice low. He said he'd tell the police about the forgery. I was desperate. I did what he asked. And what did he ask? She swallowed. To watch his wife, to tell him who visited her when he was away. Poirot's eyes glinted. Ah, so that was the betrayal, not of the heart, but of trust. Her voice broke. He made me spy on her, Monsieur Poirot, and when I refused, he said he'd ruin me. Poirot stepped closer. Then perhaps you understand why someone would wish him dead. Evelyn met his gaze. You think it was me? He smiled faintly. No, I think you are afraid of something or someone else. He turned toward the door. Tell me, mademoiselle, last night before the storm worsened, did anyone visit this room? She hesitated, then whispered, Madame Colette. I saw her through the corridor glass. She came here just before dinner. Poirot paused, nodding slowly. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. Later that evening, Poirot gathered the household in the study. The fire had been rekindled, casting flickering light across uneasy faces. Madame Colette sat by the hearth, serene but watchful. Lucien Duret leaned against the mantel, cigarette between his fingers, his expression hard. Henri Marchand stood near the window, fidgeting with his cufflinks. Evelyn sat apart, pale and silent. Poirot held the letter in his hand. Mes amis, he began, Monsieur Vasseur feared betrayal, and left behind this letter as his testament. It speaks of love, of deceit, and of a danger that came from within this very house. He unfolded it, reading aloud the line that had lingered in his mind. The betrayal comes from the heart. When he finished, no one spoke. Finally, Colette said softly, He always did love his little dramas. Even in death, he seeks to wound. Poirot studied her face. Perhaps, madame, but his words may yet reveal the hand that struck him down. Tell me, why were you in his study before dinner last night? Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked. I was not. Evelyn's voice came faintly. I saw you. The room went still. Colette turned her gaze on the governess. You saw me? Evelyn's voice trembled. Through the corridor door. You were holding something. A letter, I think. Colette's composure cracked for the briefest instant. It was a private matter. Poirot's tone was gentle. And did that matter concern this? He held up the letter. She looked at it, her eyes darkening. So he left it, did he? Even in death he mocks me. Poirot took a step closer. What did he know, madame? She drew in a slow breath, then said quietly, He knew I no longer loved him. And he could not bear it. Lucien's voice came harshly from the hearth. He tortured her, Poirot, drove her to despair. Poirot raised a finger. Ah, but despair alone does not drive one to kill. He turned the letter over, revealing a faint impression on the back, as if another page had once lain atop it. There was once a second letter here. It was torn away, and perhaps that missing page holds the final truth. His eyes moved across each face, lingering on Colette's calm mask, on Lucien's clenched jaw, on Evelyn's pale hands. "The snow is melting," Poirot said softly, "and when it is gone, mes amis, so too will vanish all that hides beneath it." He folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket once more. Behind him, the wind rattled the window panes, a soft, mournful sound that seemed almost like a whisper. In that whisper, Poirot heard it again. Betrayal, buried under snow, waiting to be uncovered. And tomorrow, he promised himself, he would find the page that had been torn away. Chapter 6. The Painter and the Perfume. The afternoon light slanted weakly through the frost-bitten windows, turning the great hall of Château Montciel into a cathedral of pale gold and shadow. Hercule Poirot walked its length in measured silence, his polished shoes tapping lightly on the marble floor. The storm had cleared, but its ghost remained, a chill in the corridors, a silence that clung to the walls like breath held too long. He paused outside a door at the far end, the artist's studio. From within came the faint scent of turpentine and tobacco. Poirot knocked once, then entered without waiting for an answer. Lucien Duret stood before an easel, brush in hand, a cigarette burning in the corner of his mouth. His eyes, pale grey and sharp as a blade, flicked toward Poirot, but he did not stop painting. "If you've come to accuse me again, monsieur, I hope at least you'll admire the composition first." Poirot smiled faintly. "I am always willing to admire beauty, monsieur, even when it conceals ugliness." Lucien gave a soft laugh. "Then you will feel right at home here." He stepped aside, revealing the canvas. It was a portrait, unfinished but striking. Madame Colette Vasseur, captured not as a grieving widow, but as something far more alive. Her eyes held defiance, her lips curved in a smile that was not entirely kind. Poirot stepped closer. "Magnifique," he murmured, "and painted with affection, perhaps." Lucien's smile thinned. "Admiration, monsieur. There's a difference." "Indeed," Poirot said, tilting his head, "but sometimes admiration is merely love, dressed in a finer coat." Lucien turned back to the painting, dipping his brush into crimson pigment. "You think I loved her? You make everything sound like theatre, Poirot. You'd rather imagine passion than truth." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "And what is your truth, monsieur?" "That I paint," Lucien said simply. "That I observe. I saw her loneliness long before you arrived here. Her husband crushed her spirit and wore it like a trophy. If you must call that love, then yes, I loved her for surviving it." Poirot regarded him silently for a long moment. Then, softly, he said, "Tell me, monsieur, did she visit you yesterday afternoon?" Lucien's hand froze. "Why do you ask?" "Because," said Poirot, "someone saw her leave your room. And later, near the lake, I found something belonging to her. A bottle of chambre noire, half empty." Lucien's eyes flicked to the shelf by the window, where a faint, familiar scent lingered. "She came to speak with me, yes. She was upset. Her husband had confronted her about something, I don't know what. She stayed half an hour, maybe less. And when she left..." Lucien set his brush down. "She said he would never forgive her. And then she dropped her perfume bottle. I picked it up and meant to return it later. But she never came back." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then how curious that it was, found by the frozen lake." Lucien's brow furrowed. "It must have fallen from her pocket." "Or," Poirot said quietly, Someone placed it there to make it seem so. Lucien's jaw tightened. You think I did that? I think, monsieur, that an artist understands staging, composition, how to guide the eye toward one truth while hiding another. Lucien laughed harshly. So now I am a painter and a murderer. Poirot smiled mildly. The two professions have often overlapped, monsieur. You deal in light and shadow, as do killers. Lucien turned away, exhaling smoke. You have no proof. No, Poirot said softly. Not yet. But proof is like pigment. One must layer it carefully until the image appears. He turned toward the easel again, studying the portrait. Tell me, when did you begin this? Lucienne hesitated. A month ago. She sat for it secretly when her husband was in Lyon. And Monsieur Vasseur, did he know of it? Lucien's eyes flicked up. He found out. Ah, said Poirot. And he was displeased. He threatened to destroy it, Lucien said through clenched teeth. Said he'd expose her, ruin her reputation. He was cruel, Poirot. Cruel in ways you cannot imagine. Poirot regarded him quietly. And yet you restrained yourself? Lucien met his gaze. Yes, because she begged me not to act. She said she'd handle it her way. Poirot's voice dropped. And her way was what, monsieur? Lucien's lips curved bitterly. You tell me, detective. She's the widow now, isn't she? Poirot did not answer. He was staring at the painting again, his eyes narrowing. The depiction was vivid, too vivid. Every fold of silk, every glint of jewelry, every detail exact. But one thing stood out. Around Colette's painted throat hung a pendant, a small silver locket. Poirot turned. This necklace, where is it now? Lucien blinked. What? The pendant, Poirot said, pointing. She does not wear it now. I have seen her all morning. Lucien frowned. It was hers. She wore it often. Perhaps she put it away after everything. Poirot stepped closer to the painting, his gaze sharp. You painted this from life? Yes. Then you would know if the locket opened. Lucien hesitated. It did. She kept something inside, but I never asked what. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, how wise of you, and how inconvenient for me. He turned toward the door. Merci, monsieur. You have been most expressive. As Poirot left the studio, Lucien called after him. If you find her guilty, Poirot, remember this. He deserved what he got. Poirot paused in the doorway. Deserving, monsieur, and receiving are rarely the same thing. Down the corridor, Poirot met Evelyn Gray, hurrying toward him, her face pale. Monsieur Poirot, Madame Colette is asking for you. She's in the drawing room. Ah, Poirot said lightly. How fortunate! I was about to seek her myself. When he entered, Colette stood by the window, gazing out at the widening landscape. The perfume of Chambre Noire hung faintly in the air. Madame, Poirot said softly, it seems your late husband's study was not the only room that held secrets. She turned, her eyes tired but steady. You've spoken to Lucien, I assume? Oui, said Poirot. He tells me you visited him yesterday. He also tells me you lost this. He produced the perfume bottle from his pocket. Colette took it, her hand trembling slightly. I dropped it, yes. I must have left it behind. Poirot regarded her for a long moment. Madame, I am not here to judge impropriety. But the ring, the perfume, the footprints, they form a pattern. A conversation in the snow. One that ends at the lake. Her gaze did not waver. You think I killed him? Poirot spread his hands. I think you feared him. And fear is the parent of desperate acts. She smiled faintly. If I had killed him, monsieur, I would not have left his ring behind. No, Poirot said softly. but perhaps someone wished us to think you had." Her eyes narrowed. "Lucien." Poirot said nothing. He merely inclined his head slightly, as if noting her reaction for later. She sighed, turning back to the window. "You see monsters in all of us, don't you?" Poirot's voice was gentle. "Not monsters, madame. Only humans. And the human heart. Ah, that is the most mysterious landscape of all." She looked over her shoulder. "Then tell me, monsieur, who do you think betrayed whom?" Poirot's smile was faint, but his eyes gleamed. "That, madame, is the very question your husband asked before he died." Outside, the wind rose again, scattering snowflakes across the frozen lake. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked like a gunshot. Poirot turned toward the sound, thoughtful. "Madam," he said quietly, "lock your door tonight. The snow may be silent, but I believe the murderer will not be." Chapter 7. The Governess's Secret. The fire in the drawing-room had burned low, its embers pulsing like a dying heart. Outside, the snowstorm had returned with renewed fury, hammering against the tall windows of Chateau Monsiel. Within, Hercule Poirot sat in his armchair, immaculately dressed as always, a delicate cup of chocolate steaming before him. His small grey eyes, however, were not at rest. They followed Miss Evelyn Grey, the governess, as she paced near the hearth, her face pale and drawn. "Please, Monsieur Poirot," she said at last, her voice trembling, "I've told you everything I know." Poirot tilted his head. "Non, non, mademoiselle. You have told me everything that is convenient to tell, but not everything that is true." She turned sharply toward him, hands clenched at her sides. "You think I'm hiding something about Monsieur Vasseur's death?" Poirot smiled, gently. "I think you are hiding something about your life, and that, mademoiselle, may be the key to his death." For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. The storm outside seemed to echo her silence, rattling the glass as though urging her to speak. Then she turned toward the window, her reflection faint in the frosted pane. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered. "No one here would." Poirot's voice softened. "Mademoiselle, I have understood many things in my life. Cowardice masquerading as courage, cruelty pretending to be justice. Try me." She drew a shaky breath. "Very well," she said, "but what I tell you must go no further than these walls." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "You have my word." She sank into the chair opposite him, her hands trembling in her lap. "5 years ago, I was governess to the child of a wealthy man in Paris, a banker named Monsieur Arnaud. I loved the boy Jean, as if he were my own. But one night—" She paused, swallowing hard. "He fell ill. The doctor was delayed. I begged Monsieur Arnaud to send for another physician, but he refused. He said the cost was too high, that the child would recover." Her voice broke. "Jean died that night, and Arnaud blamed me. He dismissed me in disgrace. I fled Paris, changed my name, and came here." Poirot regarded her gently. "A tragic story, mademoiselle, but what has it to do with Monsieur Vasseur?" Evelyn met his gaze, tears bright in her eyes. "Because, monsieur, Arnaud was his cousin. When I came here, I didn't know. Not until weeks later, when Monsieur Vasseur called me into his study and told me he knew my past. He said he'd expose me if I didn't obey him." "Expose you?" Poirot murmured. "And for what purpose?" Her face twisted. "He wanted me to watch his wife, to report on her meetings, her letters, even the smallest detail of her life. I was to spy for him." Poirot leaned forward. "And you did?" "At first, yes. I was frightened. He said he'd write to the Arnauds and destroy what little reputation I had left. But then I saw how he treated her. The insults, the coldness, the cruelty. I began to pity her." Her hands clenched tightly. "I stopped reporting. I told him I wouldn't do it anymore. That's when he threatened me again. He said he'd send letters to the police, that I had neglected a child to death. I was terrified." Poirot's expression softened. "So you hated him?" "Yes," she said fiercely. "I hated him for what he did to that boy, and for what he became, a man who broke others to feel powerful. But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I did not kill him." Poirot was silent for a moment, studying her face. "And yet," he said quietly, "you were the last person to bring him tea before he died." Her eyes widened. "You can't mean—" Poirot raised a hand. "Calm yourself. I do not accuse, but consider. The teacup was found on his desk. A faint trace of bitter almonds lingered in the air. Cyanide, perhaps. A curious coincidence, no?" Evelyn's voice faltered. He poured the tea himself. I left the tray and went to fetch his scarf. When I returned, he dismissed me. I never touched the cup after that." "Ah," said Poirot, rising slowly, "and yet someone did." She stared at him, trembling. "You think it was Madame Colette?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "It could have been anyone, mademoiselle. Anyone with access, with motive, and with fear enough to act." He turned toward the window. The snow outside swirled like smoke, endless and cold. "Mademoiselle Gray," he said softly, "you are a woman who has suffered much. But I tell you this, a secret, once buried, begins to rot, and the scent of decay, it draws the flies of suspicion." She rose slowly. "What are you saying, Monsieur Poirot?" He turned back to her, his eyes glinting. "That someone used your past against you. Someone who knew that if your secret were exposed, you would remain silent, even if accused." Evelyn's breath caught. "Lucien?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps. The artist paints not only with colours, but with people. He arranges them as he pleases, and the result, voilà, a masterpiece of deception." A long silence followed. Then Evelyn whispered, "I can't bear this, monsieur. You must believe me." Poirot stepped closer, placing a gentle hand upon her shoulder. "I believe you wish to tell the truth, but perhaps, mademoiselle, you are not the only one who has lived under a false name." She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Poirot smiled mysteriously. "That there is another in this house who hides a past even darker than yours. And it is to that past we must now turn." He glanced toward the door, where the sound of footsteps echoed faintly. Measured, deliberate, familiar. "If I am not mistaken," he murmured, "our painter approaches." Lucien Duret appeared in the doorway, his expression guarded. "Monsieur Poirot, you wish to see me?" Poirot's smile was slight but cold. "Indeed, monsieur. We have spoken of brushes and colours, of love and betrayal. But now, perhaps, we shall speak of something less artistic. Poison." Lucien's gaze flicked toward Evelyn, then back to Poirot. "You're mistaken," he said quietly. "I know nothing of poison." "Mais non," Poirot said softly. "But you know of perfume, do you not? Of scents and mixtures? I've been thinking. Chambre Noire, the fragrance Madame Colette wears. It contains a trace of bitter almond. And your studio, it smelled faintly of the same." Lucien stiffened. "Are you suggesting—" Poirot raised a finger. "I suggest nothing. I merely observe that scent is the most loyal of witnesses." The silence stretched. Evelyn's breath came quick and shallow. Lucien's hand tightened at his side. Poirot smiled gently as though, to himself, "The truth, my friends, is like the snow. You may walk over it, disturb it, even bury it beneath your steps, but it always remembers where you have been." He turned toward the fire, his tone almost reflective. "Tomorrow I shall gather you all in the Grand Salon. The time has come, I think, for the snow to speak." Chapter 8. The gathering storm morning came grey and heavy, the world beyond Chateau Montciel blanketed in relentless snow. The wind keened through the chimneys like a morning choir. Inside, the great salon had been transformed. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle around the hearth. The fire snapped and hissed, throwing long, quivering shadows across the marble floor. Hercule Poirot stood before them all, composed, immaculate, eyes gleaming with quiet command. Around him sat the anxious company. Madame Colette Vasseur, veiled in black silk and defiance. Lucien Duret, his artist's hands clasped tightly in his lap. Miss Evelyn Grey, pale and trembling. And finally, Colonel Armand Lefebvre, the old soldier whose silence had grown heavier with each passing hour. Poirot raised a hand, and the room fell still. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft yet cutting through the storm outside, "the time for polite mourning is over. One among us is a murderer. And though the snow hides many sins, it cannot bury guilt forever." A flicker of movement, Colette's gloved hand tightening on her chair. Lucien's jaw set. The colonel's monocle flashed in the firelight. Evelyn shivered. Poirot paced slowly before them. Monsieur Émile Vasseur was found dead at the base of the grand staircase. A tragic accident, so it seemed. But no, he was murdered, poisoned before his fall. The tea on his desk contained cyanide, subtle yet swift. Evelyn gasped softly. Colette looked away. Poirot continued, his tone measured. "There are 4 possibilities, 4 souls who had both the opportunity and the motive. But before we name the guilty, we must first understand the story that unfolded here." He clasped his hands. "Let us begin with the victim. Monsieur Vasseur was a man of influence, but cruel to his wife, his servants, and those dependent upon him. He sought control in all things. He discovered his wife's friendship with Monsieur Duret, and, in his rage, turned to blackmail and threats." Lucien's voice broke the silence, sharp as glass. "You speak as if you knew him." Poirot turned to him. "I know men like him, monsieur. He wished to own what he loved, and destroy what he could not." He resumed. "Madame Colette feared him, yet defied him. Mademoiselle Grey pitied her and disobeyed him. Monsieur Duret despised him. The colonel, he owed him money, did he not?" All eyes turned to the colonel, who stiffened. "A gambling debt, nothing more," he said gruffly. Poirot nodded. "Mais oui. Yet it is curious, is it not, that on the night of the murder, Monsieur Vasseur threatened to expose each of you, for debts, for secrets, for sins long past. It was not a coincidence, mes amis, that the storm began that evening. The snow trapped the guilty together, like chess pieces on a single board." He paused by the mantelpiece, studying the fire. "Now, let us examine the clues." He held up a small glass vial. The scent of Chambre Noire, Madame Vasseur's perfume, found near the frozen lake, though Madame insists she dropped it elsewhere. A trail of footprints led away from the chateau, yet the snow that fell later erased half of them. Poirot turned to Colette. "Madame, would you care to explain why you ventured near the lake that evening?" She met his gaze evenly. "I did not. I never left my room." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps not, but someone wished us to believe otherwise." Lucien's brow furrowed. "You think the perfume was planted?" "Precisely." Poirot's voice sharpened. "Planted to suggest a woman's presence, a woman driven by passion. And who, monsieur, would understand how scent can deceive better than a painter who studied light and illusion?" Lucien's chair scraped against the marble. "You accuse me again." Poirot smiled faintly. "I accuse no one. I merely observe how carefully the scene was arranged, like a composition. The scattered papers, the open window, the ring left on the desk, all designed to suggest chaos, when in truth it was art. Lucien's voice dropped low. If you truly believe that, Poirot, then prove it. Poirot stepped closer, eyes gleaming. With pleasure. He turned suddenly toward Evelyn Gray. Mademoiselle, you told me you brought Monsieur Vasseur his tea, and that you left him alone when he dismissed you, yes? Yes, she whispered, and when you returned to the study later, after hearing the scream, where was the cup? Still on his desk, she said, frowning. Untouched. Untouched, Poirot repeated softly. And yet he was poisoned. Comment? A murmur ran through the room. Colette stared at Poirot, realization dawning. Then the poison was not in the tea? Poirot turned, triumphant. Exactement. It was not in the tea. It was on the cup itself, on the rim. The poison was applied after the tray was delivered by someone who knew Vasseur would drink soon after. Lucien's voice cracked. You think I— Poirot raised a hand. Patience, monsieur. You are impulsive, but not foolish. No, the poisoner needed access, and the courage to act quickly. His gaze moved deliberately to the colonel. The old soldier stiffened. What are you implying? Poirot's tone was calm. You were the only one who entered that room after the tray was placed. You went to speak with Vasseur about your debt. You left moments before the scream. Did he forgive your debt, Colonel? The Colonel's eyes flickered. No, he said hoarsely. He laughed at me. Poirot nodded. Then I imagine you left his room trembling, not from fear but from anger. And later, when he reached for his cup, the cyanide burned through his throat before he could cry for help. A tense silence followed. Then Colette spoke, her voice shaking. You killed him! The Colonel rose, his face red. I didn't! I swear it! Poirot did not move. No, Colonel, you did not, because there is one more detail that betrays the true hand. He turned back to the fire. The bottle of cyanide was not from your supplies. It was from the studio. Used for cleaning brushes, n'est-ce pas, Monsieur Duret? Lucien's face went white. Poirot's voice softened. It is over, monsieur. She begged you not to act, but when you saw his cruelty, when you found him alone, writing letters to ruin her, you gave in to your passion. You took the poison, and you painted your revenge. You placed it on the cup, wiped the rim clean, and arranged the scene. But in your haste, you forgot the smallest detail. Lucien's voice was a whisper. What detail? Poirot's eyes glittered. The smudge of crimson on the handle, paint from your own fingers. Lucien's breath shuddered. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, with a trembling sigh, he sank into his chair. He destroyed her, he whispered. He destroyed everything he touched. I couldn't stand by any longer. Colette covered her face with her hands. Evelyn sobbed quietly. The Colonel bowed his head. Poirot stepped forward, his voice gentle now. Murder, monsieur, is always an act of desperation, never of justice. You wished to free her, and instead you bound her to your crime. Lucien looked up at him, eyes hollow. Will you tell the police? Poirot sighed. It is my duty, but I will also tell them this, that the snow buried not a villain, but a man who loved unwisely. He turned toward the window, watching as the storm howled on. And now, mes amis, he said softly, the snow has spoken. Tomorrow, when the gendarmes arrive, they will find a house cleansed of lies, though never of sorrow. Outside, the wind eased for a moment, and the first fragile light of dawn broke through the clouds. Inside Chateau Montciel, silence settled once more, the heavy silence of truth at last unveiled. Chapter 9. The Betrayal Unmasked. The morning after the storm dawned pale and brittle, the air sharp with the scent of pine and cold stone. A strange quiet had settled over Château Montciel, the quiet that follows confession, not peace. The snow had ceased, and light spilled through the tall windows like mercy that had arrived too late. In the grand salon, a fire burned low once more, though no one drew comfort from it. Hercule Poirot stood before the hearth, his small, elegant figure framed by the dying flame. Madame Colette sat nearby, her face drawn and sleepless. Miss Evelyn Grey hovered by the window, her hands twisting, nervously, and the colonel stood stiffly at the back, his eyes sunken. Lucien Duret was gone. Locked in the study under Poirot's orders, awaiting the gendarmes who would arrive by evening. The artist's confession hung heavy in every corner of the house, yet to Poirot's mind it sat uneasily like a picture slightly askew on the wall. "It is curious," he murmured aloud, "how easily a guilty man may speak, and yet how false his words may sound to the ear that listens carefully." Colette lifted her head. "You doubt him still. He confessed, Monsieur Poirot." "Oui," said Poirot softly. "He confessed, but confession is not always the same as truth." Evelyn turned sharply. "But he said he poisoned Monsieur Vasseur. He even explained how." Poirot smiled faintly, as if to himself. "And yet, mademoiselle, he explained it too well. Like an actor performing his final scene. No, no, there is something in this tragedy that remains unfinished." He turned toward the window, gazing at the white expanse beyond. "You see, the snow has given up its dead, but not yet its secrets." A log cracked sharply in the fire. Colette's voice broke the silence. "Then who, Monsieur Poirot, if not Lucien?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, that, madame, is what we shall discover together. For the snow, she remembers everything." He crossed to the table and spread several objects upon it. A silver ring, the perfume bottle, a paintbrush, and a small folded letter sealed in wax. "4 clues," he said softly. "4 threads in a tapestry of betrayal. Let us examine them one by one." He picked up the ring. "This belonged to your husband. It was found beside his body. At first, I believed it to be symbolic, perhaps a gesture of defiance, but no. The ring was removed after death. The skin beneath bore no indentation. It was placed there deliberately." He looked up, to suggest passion, to mislead. Poirot then lifted the perfume bottle. The bottle of Chambre Noire, found by the lake, but not in the snow. It was half buried in frozen slush, as if dropped there before the storm began. And yet, we know Madame Colette's visit to the lake occurred after dusk. He held it to the light. No snow inside the cap, no condensation, meaning it had been kept indoors until late that night. Evelyn frowned. "So someone planted it after the storm started?" "Precisely." Poirot smiled thinly. "To frame another. Someone who knew both your habits, madame, and Lucien's passion for you." He turned to the brush, a fine sable one, its tip stiff with dried paint. "This I found near Monsieur Vasseur's desk, fallen behind the curtain, the same pigment as Lucien's portrait, crimson, rich, vibrant." He looked around at them. But Lucien's confession contained one mistake. He claimed he used his fingers to mix the pigment. Yet this brush shows otherwise. The red on his hand, the smudge I mentioned, it was not paint at all. It was lipstick. Colette inhaled sharply. Evelyn's face went white. The colonel stepped forward. "Lipstick, then," Poirot nodded. "Yes, the true killer was a woman." The silence that followed was absolute. Only the fire crackled like a heartbeat in the void. Poirot turned toward Colette, but his voice was gentle, almost sorrowful. "Madame Vasseur, The betrayal you feared was not your husband's alone. It was your own. Her lips parted in disbelief. You think I killed him? I think, Poirot said quietly, you were pushed beyond endurance. You suffered his cruelty, his humiliation, his threats. And then, when he discovered your secret with Lucien, he demanded obedience once more. He would have ruined you, as he ruined others. You saw your life collapse, and in your despair, you acted. Colette shook her head, tears glinting in her eyes. You're wrong, Poirot. I hated him, yes, but I didn't. Poirot raised the letter from the table. Then explain this. The wax seal bore the Vasseur crest. Poirot broke it gently and read aloud. If you ever betray me, Colette, I will see you dragged through the mud. You will have nothing, not even your name. Poirot folded the letter again. He wrote this on the very night he died. It was left unsent upon his desk, and on the paper a faint trace of chambre noire. Only you, madame, used that perfume. Her breath hitched. He was going to destroy me, she whispered. Yes, Poirot said softly. And so you destroyed him first. You waited until Evelyn brought the tray. You dismissed her under some pretext. You had the vial from Lucian's studio, the same he used for cleaning his brushes. You coated the rim of the cup, carefully, quickly. Then you left, leaving the window ajar, so the snow would erase your footprints. Evelyn gasped. She framed Lucien. Poirot nodded gravely. She loved him, and she knew he would confess to protect her. He was her masterpiece, the final brushstroke in her design. Colette's face went still, as if frozen. The truth had struck her silent. Poirot continued softly. The irony, madame, is exquisite. The man who controlled you in life destroyed you in death. His cruelty turned you into the very thing he always accused you of being, faithless, deceptive, and capable of betrayal. She rose slowly, her composure shattering at last. You don't understand, she whispered. He ruined everything I ever loved. Lucien was the only man who saw me, truly saw me. I couldn't let him take that away. Poirot's gaze was sad. Mais oui, madame. Love, when twisted by fear, becomes something terrible. It blinds us, even as it gives us strength. The colonel moved forward. So that's it then. She killed him, and Duret confessed to save her. Poirot inclined his head. It was a betrayal born of devotion. Each believed the other guilty, each willing to fall to save the other. Thus the title, The Snow Betrayal. He turned toward the window, watching snow drift lazily in the weak sunlight. The snow will melt soon, mes amis, and when it does, so too will the illusions that kept you safe. He faced them again, his expression grave. The gendarmes will arrive by afternoon. Madame Vasseur, I will tell them everything, but I shall also tell them what I have seen here. Not a cold-blooded killer, but a woman crushed by a loveless cage, driven to one fatal act. Colette closed her eyes. Then I will not resist. Poirot bowed his head slightly. You show courage at last, madame. It is never too late for the truth. He turned to the others, and now we must prepare. The storm has passed, but the reckoning begins. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a faint gold light upon the snow. Poirot looked toward it with quiet melancholy. You see, mes amis, he murmured, betrayal is like snow. It falls silently, beautifully, covering everything. But beneath it, something dark always waits to be uncovered. And with that, Hercule Poirot turned from the window, his silhouette framed in the pale light, as the bells of the distant village tolled for justice. Chapter 10. The silence after snowfall. The storm had ended 2 days before, leaving Château Montciel wrapped in a stillness almost sacred in its depth. The world outside gleamed white beneath a pale morning sun, every icicle a shard of glass, every branch a frozen relic of the night the snow betrayed them all. Hercule Poirot stood at the great window of the salon, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Below him, the gendarmes led Madame Colette Vasseur through the snow. Her black coat stood out starkly against the white, her veil fluttering faintly in the wind. Lucien Duret walked beside her, his head bowed, his wrists still bound, though the expression on his face was strangely peaceful. "It is curious," Poirot murmured to himself, "how love and guilt may walk together like two old friends." Behind him, footsteps approached. Miss Evelyn Grey entered, pale and weary, her hands trembling slightly as she held a tray with tea. "You should rest, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "You've scarcely slept." Poirot smiled faintly, that familiar glimmer of humour tempered by melancholy. "And yet, mademoiselle, what better rest is there than the knowledge that truth has been restored to its proper place?" She poured the tea with care, her eyes lingering on the frost painting the window pane. "Do you think she truly loved him? Lucien, I mean?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, but hers was not the gentle love that endures. It was the desperate love that consumes. She loved him as one drowning clings to another, not to save but to avoid sinking alone." Evelyn shivered. "It's tragic, isn't it, all this, for love?" "No, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "It was not for love. It was for possession. Love that demands, that suffocates. It ceases to be love. It becomes a mirror of one's own fear." He sipped his tea, his eyes never leaving the window. Monsieur Vasseur held his wife in such a prison, and when she escaped, she built another, this time of her own making. Outside, the figures of Colette and Lucien grew smaller, swallowed by the white horizon. Evelyn sighed. And now what happens to them? Poirot placed the cup gently on the saucer. They will be judged, by men first, then by memory. Lucien's confession will weigh against him no longer, for I shall testify to the truth. As for Madame Vasseur, perhaps the court will find mercy in her despair. But the greater punishment, ma chère, is not of the law. It is to live with what one has done. Evelyn looked at him with quiet awe. "You always see everything so clearly." Poirot smiled modestly. "Ah, but clarity comes at a price. To see the world as it is, one must abandon the comfort of illusions." He turned then, glancing around the empty salon. The grand portrait stared down silently. The fire had burned itself to ash. The echoes of laughter and deception that once filled the chateau were gone, leaving only dust and truth behind. Poirot's gaze softened. "It is strange, is it not, how houses remember? The walls, they absorb our secrets, our grief. And then one day a storm comes and all is washed clean." Evelyn hesitated, her voice uncertain. "Will you stay in France long?" "For a little while," he replied. "There is peace here now, of a kind that reminds one to be humble. But soon I must return to London. There are always crimes waiting, and the little grey cells, they must not grow lazy." She smiled faintly. "I think I shall stay here a while longer." "Someone must look after the servants, settle the estate." Poirot nodded approvingly. "A wise decision. You have strength, mademoiselle, more than you believe." Evelyn looked down, embarrassed. "I was afraid through all of this, truly afraid." Poirot's tone softened. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what must be done despite it." For a long moment they stood together in silence, watching the snow melt slowly under the sun. The icicles dripped like tears. The air felt different now, lighter, though still touched by sorrow. Then Poirot spoke again, almost to himself. It began with the whispers beneath the snow. Lies, passions, betrayals, all hidden beneath a mask of civility. And yet when the storm came, the mask was torn away. Such is always the way with human hearts. Nothing remains buried forever. He turned from the window, straightened his tie, and reached for his hat and cane. "Where are you going?" Evelyn asked. Poirot smiled. "To walk. The snow has stopped speaking. Now I must listen to what remains unsaid." He stepped outside, boots crunching softly on the path. The cold air met him like an old friend. Around him, the chateau loomed, grand, haunted, dignified in its sorrow. The sky stretched pale blue above, and in the far distance, the bells of the village began to toll the hour. As he walked down the hill, he glanced back once more at the house. Smoke rose faintly from its chimneys, a fragile sign of life amid the desolation. Poirot paused, his thoughts drifting to Colette, to Lucien, to all who had loved and betrayed within those walls. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "we are all prisoners of our hearts until truth sets us free." At the edge of the lake, he stopped. The ice was cracking gently, the surface glittering with the reflection of the sun. Beneath the thin film of thawing snow, a single red petal, from Colette's perfume bottle, perhaps, floated on the water. He crouched to study it, smiling faintly. "Even the snow remembers," he murmured. "But forgiveness, sir, it must come from within." A bird sang then, its note fragile but pure. Poirot straightened, tilting his hat against the light. "And so it ends," he said quietly. "The case of the snow betrayal. A tragedy of hearts, painted in white and crimson. May the snow at last cover it gently." He turned and began his walk back toward the village, his figure small against the vast gleaming landscape. The wind carried away his footprints almost as soon as he made them, until the world was white once more, calm, unbroken, and silent. The final echoes of the storm faded into nothing. Only the faint tolling of distant bells remained, a requiem for love, betrayal, and the quiet, relentless justice of Hercule Poirot. And then there was only the silence after snowfall.